a podcast to honor the gods.
This better come with a sacrifice.
Deus Ex Media.
Content and Capable recognises the Indigenous people on the land of which we record this podcast on, the Bowendig people. We offer a respect to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Sovereignty was never ceded. Welcome to Content and Capable, the podcast made on the floor of a new bedroom because I've spent 2 weeks trying not to get scammed on Facebook Marketplace. My name's Sam, I'm your host, dodging scams as if they're dodgeballs at this point. And joining me from the Still Loading podcast is Josh. Good morning, Josh.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on the show.
I feel like I'm on radio. It's your evening, my morning.
It's fine. It's fine. Time is an illusion. People listen to this whenever they please. You know, podcasts exist in a vacuum. It could be evening for someone who's listening to this. It could be midnight. It could be, in the wee hours of the morning too. So we can go with good morning. I'm good with that.
Yeah. It's hilarious. I have a friends of mine who on their podcast were talking about when people listen, they're like, oh, I really hope people listen, at X time, or, if you're listening on your way to school or on your way to work, I really hope you're, able to hold the wheel of the steering. Very funny people.
Yeah.
But it's just one of those moments of like, oh yeah, people do listen to this at all hours. Like if I put you to sleep, go ahead. I'm happy for you to be put to sleep by this podcast. But if I don't know, I've definitely had moments where I have a podcast and I'm like, I can't listen to this. It will just keep me awake at night. Instead of, relaxing me. Or they'll start talking about something I know a lot on and I just get very anxious and excited.
I can understand that.
Of like, someone talked, what was it? Oh yeah, they were talking about Mount Gambier, like the caves, and I live in Mount Gambier. I was like, wait a second, where did they get this information from? And like, who are they? Are these people that I've spoken to? Because I've done a couple of like cave stories and things, and it just like, I was like, I couldn't get to sleep. I was like, I have to change it onto the next one.
I can understand that. Especially if it's a topic I'm passionate about. Gaming, obviously, with my own show. But like, I sometimes if there's like a hot take or something that I don't agree with, I feel like I'm in the conversation with the person and I'm almost yelling into my earbuds. I'm like, why are you? You're wrong. I'm like, you can't hear me. I need to calm down. I need to take a chill pill.
Yeah, it's one of those things as well. I find is that like no one is like free from like the trappings of parasocial relationships.
Yeah.
If there's a podcast you really love, you're going to form a parasocial. It's weird now that I work in radio and over the last 6 months witnessing some of the parasocial relationships people have with us, whether it's, the announcer or whether it's me as the producer who they only really hear for like 5 minutes a day.
Yeah.
But, they hear me and they make us like the weird ways in which humans like immediately make an assumption about you without having a huge amount of context. It's just kind of a little bit scary from time to time. I've found
it's very weird, and like these types of relationships have only grown as media has gotten more and more personable. So like if you think about it, back when TV started coming out, like TV stars were huge because no longer did you have to leave your home and go to see a movie and see the stars and acting and stuff like that. You invited them into your home. You had these people in your living room. You were watching them on a weekly basis, and then radio, same thing. You're listening to someone every single morning, so you have they're part of your morning routine. Then when the advent of YouTube and everything, and now you have like, much more personalized content because the internet kind of democratized it a little bit, and you could get these hyper specific things, so you could relate to these hyper specific personalities. And they're in your home, they're on your phone, you can literally take them anywhere. You could watch them anywhere. And now you have podcasts, which I'm not saying is more parasocial than YouTube, but it's at very least on a comparable level, because now literally you can take a podcast anywhere and have someone in your ears having feeling like you're having a conversation with them, even though you're not. It is kind of crazy to see how that happens.
There's like that meme of that kid sitting in front of that advertisement. There's like a whole bunch of girls, like the advertisement had like a whole bunch of girls sitting there, like chatting to each other. There's a kid sitting there as if he's like a part of the conversation, and he's clearly like, out. And it's like what it feels like to listen to a podcast, and hear the life updates of the host or something. And there are definitely it's just, and I think we hear this in commercial radio a lot as well. It's interesting to listen to commercial radio, not even just here in Australia, but around the world. I'm thinking, there's radio shows in the UK and in New Zealand especially that I don't listen to, but I see social media clips of, and I go, of course people are developing parasocial relationships. I also look at music artists, and you watch interviews or you read interviews of these music artists, you get insight into who they are and the life they had before fame, and then you feel like you're owed something. And it's really been interesting this last 10 years to watch artists who have blown up, become these massive phenomenons, struggle with the weird parasocial relationships. I'm thinking especially Renee Rapp and Chappell Roan, but even Miley Cyrus and Justin Bieber back in the day, when they've struggled with, wanting to live their life outside of the confines of cameras. It's been really, really hard.
Rest in peace, but Christina Grimmie, she was one of the OG YouTube stars, YouTube musician stars, kind of like Justin Bieber, but she didn't get a record deal out of it. And she rose to popularity, competed on what is it? The America's, I think it was The Voice. She competed on The Voice here in the U.S. and then didn't win, but it completely continued to blow up her spotlight. And then she was murdered by a fan. Sorry to get real negative, but it is kind of crazy. Parasocial relationships are wild.
Yeah. And, to get a little bit back on topic, you've just finished your 10-year celebrations. You've seen it all. But, over the last 10 years of creating Still Loading, you've probably seen it all. The rises, the fads, all of these, people, especially on a very internet-heavy space. Podcasts, I don't think, would exist without our abundance of internet technology. But being able to see, how early innovators have gotten into it, especially this latest wave of, creating content that is increasingly personalized for the viewer and the listener.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's weird to think that I've been doing Still Loading for 10 years. And it's interesting because the show hasn't, it's starting to it's taking off sort of now. It's still a relatively small show compared to other podcasts, but at the same time it has grown to a spot where I'm in a pretty high percentile of in terms of the popularity. I'm nowhere near obviously nowhere near your Joe Rogans, and not that I would ever want to be on that, but you know what I'm saying. Since I'm a not even specific retro gaming, I'm a video games in general podcast. There's other podcasts out there like Retronauts that's significantly more popular than mine. It's not even close. It took a while to grow. So it's weird though, because I have seen kind of the evolution of the podcasting game, because now I don't do any video content just because I'm a dad. I work a full-time job. I don't have time to record video, edit it, find funny clips and post it, and I kind of almost on principle don't use AI for that. Not to go down that rabbit hole, but just that's just for me. And I don't have time to do all that, so I just do it the old-fashioned way. I do audio only, and it's still growing, which is kind of nice. But now, before it was just kind of all you needed was audio, and now then you get your podcast and your Patreon. Now it's podcast, Patreon, and all your TikTok shorts or TikTok videos and Instagram reels and YouTube shorts and stuff like that. And I don't do any of that part. I just don't have the time. But it is interesting to see the evolution of the medium and seeing like what the algorithm is kind of pushing and everything.
Yeah. Do you think the barrier for entry for, a relatively successful podcast has gotten higher then? As you said, back in the day, it was just slap some audio together, put it on a distributing platform and it'll get out to the masses. But especially those massively popular, I'm thinking every second celebrity that has a podcast or, other podcasts that have risen to quite a bit of fame, there's a lot of video content that they create as well. Is that barrier higher now?
If you want to be successful, yes. I lucked out that I started 10 years ago when I was like 24 or 25 when I was 25 when I started. I was 25 when I started. I'm 35 now. So I lucked out. I got in early. But to do it now, like, you have to do so much more. And it's not even just the video clips. Like, the video clips alone, like YouTube, isn't going to do it. Like, anyone can be a YouTuber now, but you still need the algorithm to help push you, as well as you just need, like, luck on your side, and it's a lot more work than people expect it to be. I think the other half of it is that since podcasts took off due to the pandemic, because everyone was stuck at home and trying to find new things, everyone and their mother now has a podcast. Like, every celebrity has a podcast, and it's now like it is the popular thing to do to kind of build that relationship with your fan base. And so it is really hard to do. It's very hard to gain any type of notoriety. You can do it. And I genuinely recommend anyone start a podcast. Just know going in, there's no guarantee of like the success other people have. I'm not even talking about my own. I'm not even putting myself in a category of that success. Like, I don't make money off my show.
Yeah.
I might make $1 a month off my Patreon after all the other stuff gets taken out. Right. So it's not like, you got to get into it not for that. And I know everyone tells you like, oh, don't do it for the money, don't do it for the fame. I'm serious. Like, unless you enjoy doing it, it is a lot of work to do something only for like the hope of getting like famous or having it take off, whatnot. So it's hard now. It is really hard. You have to have either a backlog to show your clout, as it were, or you just have to really get lucky with the algorithm and the right type of online magic that makes you go viral for a second or something like that. Like, it's definitely harder now.
Yeah, look, this is my fourth year of doing this, and even that, we look at the idea of 10 years, and I think when we think of like 10 years ago, we think like 2012 or early 2010s. 10 years ago was 2014. Podcasts were becoming quite not in the same way that they became massive over the pandemic, but that was one of their first, peaks, was around that 2014 to 2016 arc. And I think that we forget how much of the growth happened, of the awareness of podcasts happened in that era. Also, the fact that 2014 was 10 years ago doesn't make sense in my head.
No,
2014 was definitely 5 years ago. At the very least, if not less. It's very, very frustrating. I can't, and the 2020 divide is just really hard. Like, I can't fathom, what, 2020 only was a year ago, right? And, the pandemic still exists, so therefore it must still be 2020.
Yep. At least for me, the world didn't feel somewhat back to normal until 2023. So it was like 3 years worth of just like what's happening. Like, and even now at my job, like, there's very few people in the office. It's more than what it was back in 2020. I still had to go in for various reasons, but it's still not a lot of people. Like, I'm still the only person that works in my area. So it's weird. It's like a weird semblance of like the pandemic's still not over. 2020 was a year ago, but at the same time, we're closing in on almost half a decade since the pandemic started. Like, we are literally less than 6 months away from when the pandemic started.
Yeah, it's also like, it's just, I think our association, like sitting at home, I look at like my colleagues now, and we were talking about the way that like because I'm new at the ABC, I've had a lot of training and bits and pieces. And I had some of my colleagues turn around and go, oh, when I did this training, they flew us, here, and we did it all in person. But since the pandemic, everyone's realised that you can do everything over Microsoft Teams. You don't need to worry about it all. And then we think back to, this is being recorded just over a week since the CrowdStrike outage. A week? 2 weeks?
Something like that. I think it was like a week or so. It's been like a week-ish.
Yeah. And like to think that, our reliance on technology, has completely changed the way that we, work. And then all of a sudden, this technology isn't as foolproof as we thought it was, even though it worked perfectly fine for 4 or 5 years, and everyone can, I've had coworkers go, I'm not feeling well, I'm going to go work from home so I don't risk, getting anyone else sick,
and you don't lose any, if you have, I don't know how it works for you guys over in Australia, but for us, if we have paid time off, we don't use it up now. We don't get in the US, we don't have some companies will give you a lot, a certain number of vacation days. My company, there is no vacation days, no sick days. You just earn PTO, and it's stockpiles. I have a lot of PTO because I've been at my job for a while, but I'm not going to get into a whole thing about my frustrations with the US, but it's nice now that if something happens, I can just work from home and not have to use the PTO. I can be sick if I feel well enough to work, but I'm not well enough to go in. I can just work from home. It's very handy.
I do think it's made us way more adaptable. I do worry about the whole, there's no excuse to not work. Even if you are sick, you can just go home and work. But still, I'm really lucky here. My job requires me to be in the office, which is very helpful. There's a couple of things. But even even our attitude towards PTO has changed here in Australia. So by law, all full-time workers get 4 weeks leave. So, 4 times 7, 28 days.
God, I wish.
So we all get 28 days leave, but that accumulates over the year. So you start with 0, and after a year of work, you have 28 days worth of leave. But you can use it as you accumulate it. So I took a week off the other week. I've taken a couple extra days off. I'm really lucky. There's a whole bunch of other leave that sorts for family emergencies and stuff, and I've had a bit of that happen this year, so it's been nice to be able to take that and go, I don't live anywhere close to my parents, so I had to fly back and sort some family things out. But to be able to do that has just been very, very helpful. But it's weird, and I think to keep steering the ship in one direction, I do think that then, the way that we interacted with media has changed a lot over the 10 years, not just podcasts, but, your specialty video games has changed over the last 10 years quite significantly. Yep. We've seen massive market shifts in terms of the kinds of video games people want to play.
Absolutely. I mean, between the rise of indie games, which is fantastic, it's a lot more unique and creative ideas that get put out in the world. Games as a service has become a thing in the last 10 years. When I first started the podcast, the big thing was you have to have multiplayer. The Call of Duty was king. You have to have multiplayer in your game. It's got to be a first-person shooter, military first-person shooter, and you got to have multiplayer in it. And then you have to have all your DLC and battle passes. Even what is it? I had BioShock Infinite, and you had to get a season pass or you didn't have to, but there was a season pass for BioShock Infinite where you get 2 different sets of story-driven DLC, and then this interesting it's not multiplayer because you can't play online, but it was an arena kind of you versus a bunch of enemies type of thing, and it would give you a series of challenges and everything. But that was back when I first started in 2014. 2014. I had to do the math. 2014. And then since then, indie games have risen, which is great. Indie games have really pushed the boundaries of the medium, which is it's honestly one of the only areas within video games that still consistently comes up with at least interesting ideas. Whether they're good or not is up to the player, but they're at least different and they're at least interesting. And then the AAA space has moved into games as a service. That's why like every single game has to have, you have the release and then you have a long tail. You know, you got to keep updating the game, keep it in the zeitgeist, so that way people can then buy microtransaction stuff, whether it's for freaking, you know, like cosmetic things or new content or anything like that. And I'm not a fan of that personally, but that's, you know, to each their own. If people like it, people like it. I don't, as long as it's not predatory, which some of it is, admittedly, there are a lot of games as a service that are predatory. But if it's, you know, like, I mean, hell, I'm not a fan of Fortnite, but Fortnite is like is the most popular example of games as a service. Like that game is constantly being updated, constantly live. They make, like, Epic makes money hand over fist for it, and that's why every game now has to have some form of a service or something like that. And I think that's a bad thing. I think if it's designed around that, you know, that's okay. But if you are shoehorning it into every single game, that's not a good thing. But anyway, to your original question, yeah, that and the games industry has evolved a ton since I started the show. It is interesting to see the evolution as it goes along.
Yeah, it's always really fascinating. I think, you know, as you said, you know, X as a service, or, you know, the way that different aspects of the industry pop up or change or look for different ways to, you know, we live under capitalism, you know, trying to make money and try to, you know, really push. And then you have, you know, I think Australia does well in this aspect of like the indie game space, where you've got people doing it for the love of it and who are doing really, really interesting work, you know, pushing the boundaries of storytelling and things like that. And I think that that's just such a, you know, I'm not a video game player myself. I've never been good at it, so I've never thought, you know, maybe I should play video games. But when I do jump on a video game or talk about video games with people, it's one of those things where you just really appreciate it for its artistry and its innovation, and the way it's continued to adapt to vastly different audience than what it was, you know, 10, 20, 30 years ago.
Well, and it's the medium, I think what a lot of people misconstrue about it is that they always think it's going to be a Doom type of, you know, Doom or some type of Call of Duty or something like that. And don't get me wrong, those games are a lot of fun. I like Doom quite a bit. Those games are fun for a different reason. But what's fun about video games is that it is a completely different medium than film or books. Since it's interactive, it's actually arguably closer to theater if you think about it, because in a theater performance, every single night play gets performed, the actors are doing the same thing, but there's slight tweaks here and there, because you're never going to perform the exact same way every single night over and over and over and over again. Same way in a game. You can play a game multiple times, but you're never going to play it the exact same way. You're going to make different decisions. You're going to try different things. And video games are interesting because they, even if you go back to like the 90s, man, with games like Final Fantasy VI, there's games that like ask very heavy and adult questions. By adult, I don't mean like sexual or like violent. I mean adult as in like things that, you know, when you get old and start contemplating life, like shit that you just think about. I always give the example in Final Fantasy VI, there's a character named Cyan who the slight spoilers just in case anyone hasn't played this 30-year-old game, but there is a character named Cyan who is defending his hometown, like his home, against this assault by what you find out later on to be the main villain, Kefka, and he's barricaded him and everyone in the castle, and the castle's doing a great job defending. It's under siege. Well, Kefka poisons the water supply, kills everyone except for him. He doesn't drink. He sees it happening, like he sees people dying, and he's able to realize what happened. And some of the people that died are his wife and child. And later on in the game, like shortly after, it's not a crazy amount of time later on, it's a little bit later on, he does join your party because now there's his inciting incident. He has a reason to come along with your quest and try to defeat the bad guys of the game. And you're walking through a forest and you come across this train, and it's kind of a dumb name. It's called the Doom Train, but the premise of it is that it is the train that ferries spirits to the afterlife. And what does Cyan see when he gets to the train? his wife and child about to board. Like the spirits of his wife and child are about to board. So now he's stuck with this emotional quandary of like, I can be with my family forever, but but the people who did this to them will do it to someone else, and I can't stop them, but I will get happiness in the afterlife with them because I can choose to board this train with them right now. So he has to come to this decision, and that then to me reflects to, as a player, like, what would you do in that situation? Like, I understand that as a completely fantasy. It's fantastical. Like it would never be possible, but it still makes the question of like, what is the, like, what do you do? Do you sacrifice your own happiness for the greater good, or do you go with your happiness because that is the only thing that's going to that will guarantee to stop your pain and suffering? It's a pretty heavy question in a Super Nintendo game with little chibi sprite graphics from like 1994. Like it is, or 90. I'm going to double check on the year because any game fan is going to be like, how do you not know that? I just don't know it off the top of my head. But that's to me is like stuff that games can do, because it's not, you're not just watching. Now that one's a little bit scripted, but in other games, like they give you choices, and sometimes those choices, excellent example, I won't go too far into it, is Spec Ops: The Line. It's a third-person shooter involving like war and PTSD, and how like there's choices that you make, and when you see what happens afterwards, you see the choices isn't always like you had a choice, and you still, and the messed up thing is that there's not really a right choice in this scenario. Side note: Final Fantasy VI did come out in 1994, but yeah. To wrap up my thoughts with it on games as the medium and like how it's evolved and everything like that, like games have actually always been these great vehicles for storytelling, but you don't always hear about it because too often you only hear about the negative side of it, or it's not nearly as bad as it used to be. But for a long time, it still had that negative connotation of like, oh, this is a kid's thing. This is for children. Yeah. And it's not. It can be. There's lots of stuff that can be for kids, but even if there's not violence or sexual content or anything like that, or innuendo, there's content even in old games that make you really think about heavy subject matter. Kind of make you really question like, what would you do in certain situations? I will always obviously I host a video game podcast, but I always like to give those types of examples just to kind of further explain, like, it's not just simply a play thing. It's like, it's more to that. It's an art form.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's very easy when we talk about, consumables like video games, like movies, like, also like celebrity, to go, oh, this is happening because of X, Y, Z, and we don't talk about the way that, the artistry has been brought into this, or the way that they've done this on purpose, or, thought about it and thought about the intended effect, the intended audience. Or I think always the greatest example for me, and it really just shows, when I grew up, is the Shrek movies and the double entendre through all that. You watch it as an adult, and it is like a very crude movie.
Yes.
But as a kid, you did not pick up on, the layers of, crude, the references to other fairy tales, you thought it was a fun movie about an ogre protecting his swamp, and all of a sudden, or like even the background, the history of that movie and the reason why DreamWorks as an organization exists, and what else they've done, and the way that they've been able to tell, really compelling stories that work for both adults and children, in a way that's really interesting. And I think that's, we forget about that sometimes. We get caught up in the fanfare, the pomp and circumstance, the occasion that is all of that's going on around you, and so you forget to appreciate some of the artistry and the work that's gone into it to make, a piece of consumable media really interesting and really fascinating to be a part of. So back to the podcast a little bit. What then prompted you that you wanted to create content about video games in particular?
Well, I've always been a fan of games. I grew up playing video games. I actually didn't have my first console till I was like 10. So it took me like I liked playing at friends' houses, but I didn't really have anything for myself that I could play consistently other than some computer games here and there. But so I've been a fan of games for quite some time. What inspired me to start the podcast in general was two things. One, Retronauts. I referenced them before. They're a retro gaming podcast. I got into retro game and video game history specifically because of, surprisingly enough, the Angry Video Game Nerd. Like the Angry Video Game Nerd, he's known for his like comedic stuff, but there was a lot of like really good information in some of his older videos about like when learning about the accessories for the original Nintendo or the Sega Mega Drive or stuff like that. I always found that really interesting because it was all stuff where I thought like, oh snap, like this stuff existed prior, like without going off on a huge tangent, just a quick example of that. The Sega Mega Drive, or the Genesis here in North America. It had the ability to go online. It was called the Sega Channel. You would pay a subscription, and you could actually download games to your Sega and to your Mega Drive, and it had exclusive games. There's a game made by, I'm totally blank, I think it's called Pulse Man, made by the people who did Pokemon, but before Pokemon came out. Like there's really interesting snippets of game history, and I'm thinking that feels very modern, like downloading a game to your system that's a unique title that you can only get on that service. But that was happening in the early 90s with Sega. So the nerd kind of turned me on to that type of stuff. Like he kind of like showed me some of those parts of history. So that started my love of retro gaming and video game history. And I still like modern games. I have an episode coming out. I don't know when this episode comes out. It's either coming out soon or it's already been out on Animal Well. So that's a game that it just came out this year. So, like I do retro and modern. But I got a love of video games from that, and Retronauts just kind of cultivated that. The second half of wanting to create content was Kevin Smith. Do you know who Kevin Smith is?
No, the name rings a bell, but I'm not sure why.
He is a director. He made the movies Clerks, Mallrats, Dogma. Those were all 90s movies. Some of his more recent stuff, he did a lot of like kind of weird, campy, schlocky horror movies in the mid 2010s. Tusk from 2014, Yoga Hosers in like 2016 or 15 or something like that. I digress. But so he's one of my favorite directors. I find him funny, and he had a whole podcast. He had a podcast empire in the late aughts, early 2010s. And since he's scaled back on it, but he had like 5 or 6 podcasts at once, like on a weekly basis. It was nuts. I don't know how the man found time to do all that, but
yeah,
he one of the things that he said in one of his Q&As really resonated with me, where he preaches about the why not attitude, where if you have an idea and you want to do it, why not? Instead of finding, because you don't want to surround yourself with no people. Obviously they're going to be like, why would you do that? People who ask why would you do this, why would you have this idea, why even bother with this? You don't want to surround yourself with those people. Like, it's good to ask questions, but it's not good to constantly question like why are you doing this? You also don't want to surround yourself with yes people, though, because then every one of your dumb ideas is going to come out. Every idea, like if everyone's always saying yes, then you end up, it's not always going to be good. But surround yourself with the why not people, the people who are going to be like, you pitch an idea to them like, hey, I really want to do this, and then they're like, why not? And they kind of come along for the ride and allow you to kind of push your creativity and your as he describes it, push whimsy. And I like that expression of pushing whimsy, allowing yourself to kind of be creative and allowing yourself trying to do different things. And that really resonated with me at the time. I was really kind of trying to find something, and I really, when I was in my mid 20s, I was trying to find something. I wasn't quite sure what I wanted. And the podcast has since grown to be like such a phenomenal outlet for me. Like, I do this because I genuinely love doing this. Like, it's fun for me. Like, that's why, I like guesting on other shows. And I mean, hell, you invited me on to talk about myself. Like, who doesn't want to talk about yourself? The podcast allows me to do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
and I got started in it because of those two influences, specifically combination of Retronauts and Kevin Smith's why not philosophy. Just like, hey, I want to do a podcast. Why not? Push whimsy, see where it goes. If it doesn't work out, at least you tried and you had a couple fun conversations with some friends. If it does work out, well, here you go. I'm here 10 years later saying it's been working out for me for the last 10 years. It took me a while to figure out what I wanted to do and how to do the podcast and all the logistics and other stuff. But the why not attitude has, like, worst case scenario, you try something and it doesn't work. Best case scenario, you try something and it works. And at the very least, you tried something and you had a fun conversation with a friend. And that's, I mean, like Kevin Smith, it's a very long-winded answer to a short question that you just asked. But that was how
I think it's really important to remind people about the why not. And I think it's been something I've been struggling with this year. I've had, as I've briefly mentioned before, I've had a couple of big family events happen over the last year, and a lot of that has distracted some of the time that I would spend. I work full time, on weekdays, and I get home and I'm kind of pretty exhausted after a day of creating audio content. And so it's not necessarily in my greatest, I don't have the greatest amount of motivation to create more audio content after working and someone paying me to create audio content. So often, this podcast gets relegated to my weekends. I spend a lot of my weekends editing and guesting and getting people on and messaging people and organizing things. But also the weekends is where you want to go and do things. I do a lot of travel. I live in country Australia. I live in country South Australia. It takes at least 8 hours for me to go back to my parents' place. It's at least a 5-hour drive to the nearest capital city. It's a hard place to leave, and it takes a lot of time. And so it's been eating out some of the time. And I've had to have a couple of hard conversations with myself. I haven't been super consistent this year, and I've gone, do I need to take a break? Do I need to readjust in the way that I'm doing this podcast? But the why not is probably the only thing, probably one of the few things that have kept me going, is that I actually really love doing this, and why not do it? Why make the decision to pause, or there's always a legitimate reason as to why you should stop or maybe take a break. But also you got to think about the consequences of taking a break. It's very easy to go, oh yeah, I'll take a break, and then all of a sudden, I've one of my, not pet peeves, but one of my things that I always get frustrated with is I get to the end of a podcast, up to date with it, and they're like, oh, we're taking a break, we'll be back soon, and they never come back because it's very hard to restart the inertia of creating a podcast week after week.
No, you're 100% right, man. It's tough, and what you were talking about there too, with like you haven't been able to stay as consistent this year. That's consistency is hard. It's very, very hard. It took me 6 years to go weekly on my show. For a while, I was bi-weekly, and then in the summer of 2020, I started going weekly, and then my daughter was born, and I went back to bi-weekly for a little bit because I didn't know how to be a dad. I was learning all this stuff on the phone. I was also getting like maybe 3 hours of sleep a night because they wake up every like 2 to 3 hours for feeding. So I wasn't quite sure how I could manage that. Now I think I can handle it pretty well. I know kind of like the logistics of it, but even so, I think if content creation isn't your job, if the podcast that you're working on, whatever creative endeavor you're working on, if it is not your job, you should prioritize your mental health and everything else over it. As much as I love this show, I don't make money off of this. I make, like I said, like maybe $1 a month after hosting fees and all that other stuff. But it still is like, even with that, it like you do. What am I trying to say? Like, if something were to come up that I couldn't do this, I'd be so sad. I'd be so depressed. But my family has to come first, and unfortunately my livelihood has to come first. Even though I like doing this a little bit more, but at the same time, it also should be fun. Like if you are stressing yourself out because I need to do this every week or every other week or every month,
Yeah.
Don't do it. Don't take your time, figure out what works for you, and then adjust your release schedule or adjust your podcast schedule or whatever, whether it's a YouTube video, whether it's music, whether it's social, if you're a social media influencer, which I don't know, that's cringy to me, but you know what?
Don't take advice from me. I don't think.
To each of their own, right? Whatever. But you got to figure it out for yourself. For me, it took me 6 years. It took me about, I want to say 2.5 years to start doing stuff bi-weekly. Because believe it or not, the hardest thing was just what the hell do I talk about every week? It was so hard for me to do that. But then doing it bi-weekly for 5 years or 4 years or whatever, it got me into a rhythm. And then I started going weekly. I'm like, okay, I did a special summer series called the Summer of PS2 in 2020, which is when I started going weekly because the PlayStation 2 turned 20 in 2020. And I started prepping for that, even though the first episode wasn't going to be out till June of 2020. My first episode was recorded in December of 2019 because I didn't know how far in advance I would have to prep for all this. But that taught me how to go weekly. So I feel like if you can figure out what works for you, and then start working your schedule around that. And then you can start figuring out, okay, can I pick up the pace? Do I have the mental capacity? Is my mental health in a good enough place that I could pick up the pace on this and keep pushing stuff out?
Yeah. It's hard as well. I think a lot of it's got to do with consistency. I've been really lucky the first 2 and a bit years of the podcast. I was living in the same place. I had the same job, had the same routine. So, I knew exactly how to work recording and editing around my routine. And then 18 months ago, I moved, almost 2,000 Ks south for a job. And took a new job working 9 to 5 instead of 7 to 9 and then 9 to 4. And then Sundays I had the day off and, all sorts of these crazy hours that I was doing.
And then you just moved again. So you changed your schedule up again.
Yeah. And every time you move, it's a new environment. It's getting everything set up and settled. And I've come to the realization through all of this that, moving every 6 months is probably not the most healthy thing I could be doing.
No.
And
very stressful.
It's very, very hard to convince yourself of that. I think, I've moved 3 times in the last 18 months and, to be able to do that, moving to a different state, to a different culture, to a different job, getting yourself settled, it completely unsettles everything else about your life. You change. I always remember my parents turning around to me going, the change in job or the change in position in your life is a great opportunity to change your lifestyle, whether that's exercise or being more conscious about other things or changing the way you eat or all sorts of things that you can do to maybe better your mental health, maybe better your physical health, or to do something different that you've never done before. It's very easy to, in that unsettled period, to wonder why you aren't able to do the things you used to do.
Yeah.
And you all of a sudden you go, and I, especially at the start of this year, I got very stressed, and it was like, I've got to keep doing it, I've got to keep going, I've got to keep moving forward. And I had friends of mine turn around to me and go, take a break, just let everything happen, let everything and take a break, take as long as you need, and I've taken that attitude of I can't care about how often I do this. Anyone who's been listening to this podcast, it's been pretty much weekly through the seasons that I've had over the last 3 years of podcasting where, it's every week through the season I declare, from mid-February through to early December. But then this year I've, done 3 podcasts and then had a break for a month or, done 3 episodes, released another 2 over the next 2 months and then, gotten back to being a bit more consistent. And it's been hard, I think, for myself to convince myself I can get back to a consistency. But at the same time, I know that that's going to be important, being able to let myself take the break, which I've never let myself do, is really hard. I remember I've edited podcasts on planes. I've edited podcasts, while on holidays in my parents' bedroom. I've done it instead of doing uni assignments back in the day. I've always taken it a little bit too far in terms of my willingness to keep going, and I think it's really important to acknowledge, this is the time that I know I'm not going to be consistent. I know that the people who want to listen to the content or are going to, they've subscribed to me in their feeds and stuff. And at some point, I'll come back with a real consistency, probably 2025, let's be honest. But, at some point, I'll come back with a real consistency and I'll get to have a fresh start, I think, as well. I think that we don't appreciate sometimes the opportunity of taking a break allows for us to rethink the way we do our content and the way that, we structure things or ask people to do it. I've been able to explore different technology behind the scenes that allowed me to, create this podcast more efficiently. Time zones are always a bit of a problem. It's now more of a problem now that I live in a half an hour time zone. So it's just, understanding that and, getting on top of it is very hard.
I could understand that. And I feel bad. I could have sworn I didn't know you were in the half an hour time zone. So what time is it for you right now? I thought it would have been 11 a.m. for you right now when we're
It's 10:30 for me.
It's 10:30.
So on the East Coast, it's 11 a.m. And one day, probably this year actually, I'll convince my friend Taylor, who equally hates time zones as much as I do, to complain about it all. But in the winter, Australia has 4 time zones. I
was looking into that. I was half worried that you were at the one that's another hour ahead. So I would have been an hour late or something like that. I would have felt so bad.
When you messaged me at 9:30, I was trying to figure out the maths of whether when you said 10 a.m. we started at 9:30 or we started at 10:30. And so I was sitting eating breakfast. I was like, well, as long as I'm ready by 9:30. And then you messaged me right before. I was like, okay, so it's 9:30. It's just one of those things. The amount of times I've screwed up a time zone conversion is mildly ridiculous. And I think also the day that we were originally scheduled to record this, I was going to be recording it
6 8
in a different state. I was on a trip, and then the night before I felt so incredibly ill that I was like, I don't know whether this is going to last into the morning or whether I'm about to have the most miserable 12-hour drive home of my life. Because my plan was to record with you and then get in a car and drive for at least 9 hours to get home for work the next morning.
I think you made the right choice to postpone. I would not have wanted to do that either. And going back to what we said before, you got to prioritize yourself first, especially for something that's supposed to be fun. Why put yourself through this if it's not going to be fun? And I say that to all my guests on my show too. I've had guests who have ducked out at the last minute and they feel bad. I'm like, hey, if you have a lot going on and you're going to be miserable the whole time, it's on a selfish level, it's going to make the episode worse. But more importantly, it's not going to do anything to benefit you. If you think that coming on the show can distract you from whatever's going on and that would help, then yeah, come on. I don't give a shit if it does anything to the quality of the show. I don't care about that.
Yeah.
If you are going to have a good time, that's all that matters. If you cannot, if it's not going to be good for you, if you can't, if you have too much stuff going on in your life, because life's fucking hard. I get it. There's a lot of stuff that goes on and a lot of stuff that happens to everybody. You shouldn't feel bad. I'm asking, when I have people guest on my show, I'm asking them to give up their time, which is something that you don't really get back. I'm asking people to give up their time for a conversation, a recorded one, but it's a conversation. And I kind of try to take that into account when whether it's me guesting on a show or whether a guest is coming onto my show. This should be fun. And if you're not having fun, I don't want you to waste your time because it's precious.
Oh, 100%. And I think you can tell, the listeners can tell when you're having fun and when you're not having fun. And, no project lasts for 10 years if you aren't having fun about it. I look at the people I look at the content creators that created podcasts, you know, they inked deals with Spotify, or, you know, their you know, talent agency were like, well, this is a great idea, you know, podcast, the next big thing. And you look at the people who weren't in it because they loved doing it or they loved the concept, and those projects don't last. You know, the amount of celebrity podcasts that have finished up, that haven't been renewed, is massive. But the amount of podcasts that still stay, you know, I'm thinking especially some of the like content creator podcasts where they're just having the best time ever. They're giggling, they're laughing, they're enjoying the conversation. They might be asking hard questions and having, you know, a really great, you know, fulfilling conversation as well, but they're loving every second of it.
Yeah.
Those are the podcasts that I don't have any issues with. You know, go ahead, you know, make the thing that makes you happy. But if you're there just for a quick buck, then, you know, it might be worth, you know, re-looking at your priorities. I don't think podcasts are an inherently money-making venture. It's very hard to monetize a podcast, and to maintain monetizing a podcast as well. I look at my poor friends who have, you know, Patreon accounts and, you know, looking at trying to expand it or trying to get more people to, you know, be a part of their community who they think would be great to be a part of their community. And it just sucks. And it's really easy to be really discouraged because the numbers aren't what you expect or the numbers aren't going the way that you would hope them to go.
Yeah. It's tough, man. And that's why I always tell people you have to have fun. The worst part is a lot of the things other, you know, like what would you suggest for starting a podcast, or what would you recommend to a first prospective podcaster or content creator? Like all the cliches are true, and that's the most frustrating thing is like, because 9 times out of 10 people will hear a cliche and it means nothing to them, whether it's because they don't have the context to understand it. Because, you know, when I became a dad, all the bullshit cliches, oh, it changes your world and all this other stuff, that took a little bit. It took a little time for me to get to that, but it still is like a lot of the things that like you don't understand it until you're there. Like cliches sometimes finally make sense once you have the context. Other times cliches make sense when someone is able to tell them to you in a different way that you've never heard before, and suddenly now like, okay, I understand this now, and a switch gets flipped. So it's frustrating, at least from my end, when people ask me, not that people ask me this, but, you know, like when the answers that I have, I can't think of a better thing to respond with, except for like cliches, like only do it if you have fun, don't get into it for money, blah blah blah. And it's because the thing is with podcasting, I mean, you know this, you've been doing this for 3 years. It's a lot more work than you expect it to be. It's not as much work as YouTube. I will concede that. I've done some, like, I've tried making my own YouTube videos. I would film like little action scenes, and I would spend like 4 or 5 hours with friends and airsoft guns in the woods trying to make like little action scenes and everything. And then I would spend 12 hours editing it only to create a 3-minute video. So in total, I would spend like 16 hours. Now, granted, part of that is probably that I'm not a professional and I'm learning the ropes and all this other stuff. But it still is like, that was a lot of work to do for a 3 to 4 minute video. And it just didn't really, you know, like, that's a lot. With podcasting, I like the barrier to entry is lower. You just need a microphone and you can get Audacity for free. It's so simple in order to get in there. And even for a hosting site, you can use Spotify for podcasters. Anchor is what it used to be. You don't have to pay a damn thing. You can just set up your site like that. You can set up your podcast like that, and it will distribute it to Apple Podcasts and YouTube Music, and of course to Spotify itself. The barrier to entry arguably is even lower than YouTube, because at least with YouTube you would need some type of either video editing software, or you just do everything off the cuff and you don't edit a damn thing and you just hope that you didn't have any flubs or anything like that, which usually doesn't do well in the algorithm. They like fast editing and all that other stuff. But with podcasts, all you need is a microphone and recording software. And microphones, you don't even need a crazy nice one. You can buy a Yeti for like $20, like $30, $50. And realistically, you would only have to spend $30, $50 to get into this, versus buying a webcam if you're a YouTuber, or buying a very nice professional camera that you use as like your webcam or something like that, and buying a mic, and having to invest like that, and getting a ring light and stuff like that, which ring lights aren't expensive, but the point still stands.
It's still a lot of like purchases, and in my past I've done video content creation, and it is there was always the adage. I had a professor once tell me, for every minute of audio, it's 3 minutes of editing, 3 minutes of creation, and for every minute of video, it's 9 minutes of creation, and it just goes up exponentially. Which is I think it's even more outside of a journalism context. We're very, very easy. Everything's all set up for us, and people know what we're about, what we're doing. I remember I've spent years on projects, getting them off the ground. And it is, if you don't have the passion for it, everyone thinks it's a bit of a cliche, the way that, film stars and directors and producers talk about making movies. But the only reason that they're successful is because they have such a passion for it. And it's the same in all creative endeavors. I think it's very easy for us to be disenfranchised and go, oh, this is just a random creative endeavor. I'm not going to, really have, I'm just going to see how it goes and not really think about it too much. You've got to be invested in it. And I think podcasts is a much more of a mental investment than it is sometimes a physical investment. It's very easy, I think, to create content. We have these, mobile phones that, will shoot really high quality footage and will take fairly decent audio and stuff, and all you have to do is have a tripod and a ring light, and you're a social media content creator. You don't really need to think about it. So there are points, there comes a point where everyone has to mentally go, I'm all in. But with podcasting, it's the long game. It's always been the long game. And I think it's very easy for us to forget that the long game is what we're working towards.
That is a very good point that I didn't even, because even the medium itself of podcasting is long form. It's not even like it's the long game, and it's long form. Like we're going on at almost an hour of recording, and that's about the standard length of a podcast, right? Like mine are stupid long. I have on my Patreon, I do a movie podcast that minimum is like 2.5 to 3.5 hours. Like I do long form. I really some long form stuff. But you bring up a really good point with like how this is, you play the long game in podcasting. It's a long form of medium in general. Also, I think you mentioned before, it's like mentally taxing a little bit more, and I never thought of it that way, but you're kind of right, because when you're having a conversation with someone, something that I don't think a lot of people think about is active listening. Active listening is crucial, especially like in life in general. It's crucial in life in general, but it's especially crucial in podcasting. And I find myself not doing it. And for those who don't know what I'm talking about with active listening, like, of course, I'm listening to what you're saying right now. I'm not actively listening. Like, you could be, but active listening is basically, the way I describe it is you are not just waiting for your turn to talk. You are waiting to listen to what the other person is saying, absorbing that information, and then responding. Because a lot of times, and I've done it in this episode already, unconsciously, because literally everyone does it. It's not like it makes you a bad person if you just wait for your turn to talk, but it's a thing. Like, you have, like, active listening means you are consciously not thinking about the next thing you're going to say. You are just in the moment with the person speaking and listening to what they're saying. There is not a thought in your mind about what your response is just yet until that person is finished. And podcasting, it takes a while to learn that skill. It's a skill that you can learn, anyone can learn, but it can take a while.
Oh, yeah. I do, and so many people, and I think this is probably one of the few arts of like conversation that we've forgotten, but that active listening makes people feel valued, and it also makes other people who are listening in on your conversation want to listen into your conversation. That's what makes an engaging podcast. It's one of those it's one of those core tenets that we're taught at university about journalism. While you might have a list of questions you're to ask, if the talent goes in one direction, you've got to follow them in that direction and ask the follow-up questions and for clarification and things. I've found it really hard trying to, be good at that while, I need to hit these XYZ points and I need to ask these questions.
Yep.
But I've also got to keep, radio interviews don't go for more than 10 minutes. You've got to try to make it less than 10 minutes.
That's very hard. Yeah, you have to cram a lot of content in that span. Sorry, continue, but that's a good point.
No, exactly. No, I think it... And... I feel really lucky. I've had my parents, especially my mother, really hated the fact that there were so many people in her life that didn't actively listen. I had a conversation with a friend the other day and said, part of my family just doesn't want to interact with people that they don't already know a huge amount of their lives. And it's very easy, I think, in the modern day to only really interact with your same social circle. But when you're asking a stranger questions or someone you don't know questions, you've got to be willing to, it's a journey. A journey requires two people. These two people go on this journey, so two people can take it in any direction. And we've lost a little bit of that art, in my opinion. But also, I think some of the greatest content creators out there are really great active listeners and are so ready. As I keep telling guests on this podcast, let the tangents come and let them go, because we've got heaps of content. I don't send out pre-prepared questions to many guests unless it's an accessibility requirement or something. But you just don't do that because the conversation could go any direction. This was not the direction I was expecting this conversation to go. But at the same time, it's been a really engaging chat, and I think that that's probably one of the great talents of having people who are wanting to actively listen and learn from each other. On together to have a chat.
Well, and one of the things that I feel like people don't do for anything in general, but specifically with content creation, if you want to really learn, you got to start branching out from what your personal social circle or sphere of interest is. For example, listen, I'm not going I know I brought him up before. I'm not saying this as a thing to go listen to him, but Joe Rogan. I'm not talking about any of his politics. I disagree with a lot of his stuff. However, he's a good interviewer. I'm not going to deny that. He's a very good interviewer. He is an active listener. There's a reason why his show has become as successful as it is, because he actively listens to everything that his guest is saying. That's I'm only commenting on specifically the his prowess as a podcaster, as a conversationalist. If you don't want that type of thing, someone I watch, Sean Evans from Hot Ones. It's not a podcast, but if you watch his interviews, his questions, he gets deep pulls, and he finds it's not even just he's always going for the deepest pull possible. I gotta really impress this person, and when you worked at this really obscure local restaurant when you were 15, was it really this blah blah blah? He doesn't always go for that, but he'll pick if he's asking the most recent episode of Hot Ones at the time we're recording this was with Hugh Jackman and Ryan Reynolds, and for the release of the new Wolverine and the fucking Deadpool movie.
Whatever.
And one of the questions he asked them was what's it like getting fitted for one of those superhero suits? What's the process like? How do you how far in advance do you have to start working with the costume designer on this and stuff like that? That's a question that you wouldn't really think to ask someone, but that's hyper specific to them. That's still being personable and actively listening, and not related to all the things I just mentioned are specific more to interviews, but you can find influence from just about anything. I do on my show, and it's an annual thing now. It's called the Final Fantasy Fantasy Draft. It's what happens when fantasy sports and Final Fantasy mix and meet together. You don't need to know anything about fantasy sports to enjoy it. If you're a fan of Final Fantasy, it's shameless plug. Go check out those episodes. There's one coming out late in August this year, and there's two others, one from 2023 and one from 2022. Anyway,
Yeah.
That idea came from me listening to a James Bond podcast because they did a James Bond fantasy draft. And I'm like, I like this idea. I like how they're like creating their fantasy Bond movie by I'm going to take, Sean Connery for mine, and I'm going to take Christopher Walken as my villain, even though, that's a Roger Moore. And I'm not going to go full Bond nerd, but you get the idea. And you take that idea, I'm like, oh, how can I do that in a video game context? And then the Final Fantasy draft was born. And I think like if you listen to things that are outside of what you specialize in, or partake in things outside of what you specialize in, that can influence what you do, and it can really provide some really cool ideas that you can then borrow and use as an influence for yourself.
Oh, 100%. And I think the other thing as well is finding shared context as well. Obviously, I think in the last week or so, we've had a lot of Kamala Harris interviews go viral, a lot of audio clips from them. And it's very easy to just rely on those. But at the same time, some of those interviews are really boring. They're just your cut and dry politics interviews. I've done thousands of them before. It's very easy to be very boring with them. And what I love is that a lot of news networks, especially in the States, are turning towards celebrities who often are looking for shared context first before the list of questions they might be supposed to ask. So there's this viral clip of audio of an African-American, I think she's just a celebrity journalist. She does some politics interviews, asking Kamala Harris about how she gets her hair the particular way she gets it done. Because with curly hair, it's a big question. How do you get your hair done? And that back and forth of the shared context of knowing how hard it is to get curly hair to look a particular way. How does Kamala Harris get it done? And then a lot of African American content creators then also sitting there and trying what Kamala Harris has talked about, and understanding, oh wait, this actually works really well and this lasts really long. I'm trying to think. There was another example that I thought was really, really fascinating. Oh yeah, Snoop Dogg at the Olympics. The Olympics have started up, but having Snoop Dogg commentate the Olympics, he's not there because he's an expert at sports. He's there because he is your cool uncle that you sit down and watch the Olympics with, and you hear his commentary in the living room. Yep. And so regardless of whether you're watching the Olympics with your family or by yourself or on TV at a bar or, wherever you're watching it, you will hear what Snoop Dogg has to say about the Olympics, Yep. Then I heard that, what's her name? The famous cook. She went to jail forever for tax evasion. Martha Stewart's coming and commentating the Olympics as well with Snoop Dogg. And Snoop Dogg specifically asked her to come and do the equestrian because he's afraid of horses.
That's really funny.
And it's just one of those... You just don't have those kind of... It's very easy when this is your day job, that you've got an element of professionalism that you list. But the human aspect of it is incredibly more important, especially when you're creating content for people. And I think we lose that from time to time. I think our news, sometimes our podcasts, but also, our movies and stuff lose that humanity.
Yeah.
And if we forget about it, we don't create as good content as we could or we normally would.
Remembering the humanity is, that's a very, I'm not saying this about the way you phrase it, but just the way I just said it, remembering the humanity in your content is a dramatic way to phrase it, but it's rings kind of true to me. Whenever I have a guest on my show or I'm guesting on another show, I in the back of my mind, I understand realistically this isn't what happens every time, but in the back of my mind, I go into it with the intention of I want to be this person's friend. Whoever whoever is on my show, I want to be your friend. Listen, I understand out of context that would sound kind of creepy, but I'm not going to record a podcast with someone for the first time and be oh man, my best buddy, here's all my hopes and dreams and my darkest secrets. No, but I am going to approach that conversation I am making a new friend. And I try to making a new friend, and just because I do that, I understand logistics. I understand that doesn't mean suddenly we're best friends, but that makes the conversation so much more enjoyable when the entire point is me trying to find common ground with someone. type
Oh,
of thing.
100%. Yeah. And I think also, if it's a guest on your podcast, this person is unfamiliar, A, with the podcast, B, with the format, and C, with the audience. Or, if you're guesting on the podcast, how do you want to represent yourself? How do you want to make yourself most appealing? Because oftentimes, and we forget about this sometimes, but like guesting on people's podcasts is a chance to market ourselves as well. And I don't know, I'm particularly bad at it. I've guested on a few and I keep forgetting to, especially at the end, just say the right things, to mention the right things. But also, that chance to market often relies on your performance as a guest.
Mm-hmm.
How engaging, how interesting were you? Did you spend the time, having a really, really interesting conversation? You don't get to do that all the time, and I've definitely found that guest segments on podcasts are often few and far between. You don't have a huge amount. Everyone's very busy. Organizing guests, especially with the time zones coming out of Australia,
very hard.
It's always really difficult.
It's very difficult. Yeah.
But it's very important that when you do it, you try to put your best foot forward, and that doesn't mean the perfect foot forward. It means how do you think the audience will want to hear you, or what will the audience listen to and go, this is someone I want to go and seek out afterwards. Because if you're trying to make friends with the host, you're trying to make friends with the listeners.
That's true.
And that's exactly what we're all trying to do. And it comes back to the very start of this episode where we were talking about parasocial relationships as well.
Yeah. It does tie in that was an accidental callback, but it worked. You know what? Props to you. That was an expert callback, my friend. You pulled that off beautifully.
It happens on accident about once a month, and you know what? We take it as it comes, and we'll always take credit for it. Josh, thank you so much for coming on Content and Capable and chatting with me. I feel like I'm good friends with you now after an hour of chatting. There's probably more conversation we could have for hours on end at this point, but thank you so much for coming on and even just briefly having this great conversation with me.
Thank you for having me on. I hope that I actually because hopefully I answered. The episode went in the direction that you wanted it to go in terms of it, because I don't know. I love coming on other podcasts. I was really honored you asked me to come on. I listened to some of your other episodes and I really enjoyed it. So hopefully I didn't steer the direction of the episode too far off or anything.
No, I think it worked totally fine. And you know what? Any direction is a good direction, I think. Any conversation that makes me smile as I finish off is always great. And there's only been very few times I've been incredibly grateful. I think also the people I've had on have been incredibly great. Have always managed to leave a recording with a smile and mildly, socially exhausted. But that's
podcasting.
Having a conversation over Zoom for active listening. It's not. It's a lot of work. Josh, is there anything that you've been listening to, watching, playing that you wanted to plug?
You know what? There has been something that I've been listening to recently. I'm a huge fan. I mentioned before about listening to other things that are not part of your normal not sphere of influence, but part of your normal circle. I've been listening to a lot of Comedy Bang Bang. It's another podcast. It's a pretty well-known podcast at that. I'm not they have a big fun. They're doing like a whole tour right now over here in the U.S., across the country, and they're going to the U.K. as well. So they're pretty big, but they're an improv comedy podcast, and they provide me many hours of laughs as well as just a lot of just much needed stress relief. Whenever I have a lot on my mind, it is always something that I enjoy putting on in the background. The characters, the improvisers that come up with some of the craziest characters I've ever heard of. I don't want to. I could go off. I could list so many of them. But I won't do that.
Yeah.
If you like improv comedy, it's worth checking out. It's a lot of fun. They release weekly, and on top of that, right now, they are doing this thing where they come out their episodes come out at midnight. I guess Eastern Standard Time. I don't know if it's the same Pacific. Anyway, it comes out on Mondays in the U.S. And then every Thursday in the US, they have an episode that comes out from their backlog because there's like over 600 episodes of the podcast. Like it's a long running show. And a lot of their older stuff is behind a paywall. So every Thursday, they release an old episode from the backlog, and they do it in themes. So they pick a character that has come on the show numerous times, and they're like, here's the quintessential so-and-so, whatever the character's name is. And so you can kind of follow the journey of like how the character came to be and then where they are now type of thing. So Comedy Bang Bang, I've been really into it lately, and it's a lot of fun. I mean, I've always been into it, but specifically lately, I've been really diving into it. So Comedy Bang Bang, I gotta shout that out. You can find me where all good podcasts are given for free. Still Loading Podcast can be found on YouTube Music, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. It can also be found like on YouTube itself. It's just a thumbnail in the audio, but it's there. If you want to follow me on social media, I'm at Still Loading Pod on Twitter because I refuse to call it the other name. Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads, Twitch, at Still Loading Pod on all those, and at Still Loading Podcast on YouTube. And that is where my show can be found.
No, I've been watching a lot of comedy recently. I think the news has been, I work in news. News is a little bit overwhelming. And looking at the TV and having live shots from the Republican National Convention on Australian TV news.
I'm so sorry you have to do that.
I just I don't know. To express some of my private frustrations, I just don't understand why we needed to live broadcast it. Like, I know that the time zones worked great for morning television, but it didn't. I just looked at it was like, okay, there's a decision we've made. Whatever. There just mustn't be much else news going on. But lots of comedy for me. The other book, I think it comes back to our conversation around active listening and active conversations. Is a book called Storytellers by a very prominent Australian journalist, Leigh. She is this really, really great storyteller. And she writes this book. She's written this book, and it's very much, meant for journalists about, how to become a good journalist, what, you're kind of expected to do and things. But what I found really interesting about it was it really digs down deep into, what it means to tell a good conversation and interact with the world around you. I think it's a really great thing if you're looking for something to kind of give a peek behind what some of the work that a journalist does, how they've gotten to where they are, but also then a little bit of an idea of, what skills and what life lessons they've learnt from the work they've done. I think it's a really, really great opportunity to have a look into that. It's a little bit self-fulfilling, a little bit, how great are journalists? But, I think it's also really a really interesting read. It reads really quickly too. I got through the first 200 pages in about an hour and a half, which is fast for me. So definitely check it out. Amazing. Well, thank you once again, Josh, so much for coming on the podcast. Of course. I've had such a blast chatting with you.
Thank you for inviting me on. It was a good time. And sorry, one last thing, just because you shouted out something so kind of introspective, dealing with a really introspective thing. This will be a very quick plug. Alda's podcast called Clear and Vivid. It's all about the communication and how we communicate with each other. He interviews very interesting people, crisis negotiators. He interviewed people who dealt with what is it? There was a woman he interviewed a guy he interviewed who was the one who negotiated a peace deal between two Middle Eastern countries. I'm blanking on all of this. I'm so sorry. But Clear and Vivid, it's very much worth listening. He's an extremely good interviewer, and I highly recommend that as well. But but that's it. Thank you once again for having me on, man. This has been a lot of fun.
No. Content and Capable was recorded, edited, and produced by Samuel O'Brien. You can follow the podcast at Content, the letter N, Capable on Instagram, and you can find it on Facebook. You can also send an email through to contentandcapablepod@gmail.com with any of your thoughts, queries, or concerns. The best way to support the podcast is to leave a review on your preferred podcatcher so more people can hear the podcast. The art was done by Opia, and the music was written, edited, and produced by Jason Hilton. Content and Capable is proud to be a part of the Deus Ex Media Network, where you can find a podcast for any of your nerdy interests.
We are
Not the crystal gems.
We are the Bits,
The bits, the bits, the bits.
a Steven Universe review podcast
Celebrating the 10th anniversary.
of a show that's very near and dear to our hearts,
So get ready to cry with us
and try our best not to sing.
as we rewatch one of the gayest shows of the 2010s,
New episodes coming out to you every Friday.
featuring your favorite host, Charlie.
And Robert.
Thank you for listening to Content and Capable. Don't forget to rate and review, and we'll see you next week for another episode.
Deus Ex Media.